man stood at the edge of the cliff, contemplating the void below. He had spent his entire life climbing this mountain, convinced that at the summit he would find the meaning of existence. Now, staring into the abyss, he realized the cruel joke the universe had played on him. The meaning wasn't at the top, it was in the act of climbing itself. He laughed bitterly, the sound echoing off the rocks and fading into the emptiness. As he gazed down at the world below, he thought about all the things he'd sacrificed to reach this point: relationships, career opportunities, the simple pleasures of a normal life, all discarded in pursuit of this elusive truth. He told himself it would all be worth it when he finally understood the grand design. But now, faced with the stark reality of his situation, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd been a fool all along. The wind whipped around him, as if nature itself was mocking his hubris. He thought about turning back, about trying to reclaim some semblance of the life he'd left behind. But it was too late. He'd burned too many bridges, pushed away too many people. The only way left was forward, but forward led to nothing. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his life running from the meaninglessness of existence, only to find it waiting for him at the finish line. As he turned to begin his descent, he slipped on a loose pebble and plummeted towards the ground. In those few seconds of free fall, he experienced a moment of perfect clarity. Life, death, love, hate, all were merely ripples in the cosmic pond, fleeting and ultimately meaningless. Just before impact, he had time for one last thought. Well, at least I won't have to climb down. The universe, in its infinite wisdom and terrible sense of humor, had given him exactly what he wanted: a shortcut to the bottom. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. Instead of the hard ground, he landed in a hidden lake, the cold water shocking him back to consciousness. As he sputtered to the surface, he realized he was still alive. Was this a second chance or just another cosmic joke? He dragged himself to the shore, lying on his back and staring at the mountain he'd just fallen from. In that moment, soaking wet and probably concussed, he started to laugh. Not the bitter laugh from the mountaintop, but a genuine, uncontrollable belly laugh. He laughed at the absurdity of his quest, at the ridiculous twist of fate that had saved him, at the sheer persistence of life in the face of meaninglessness. As his laughter echoed off the cliffs, he realized that perhaps this was the point all along: not to find meaning, but to create it. To laugh in the face of the void, to embrace the absurd and find joy in the journey, even when, especially when, the destination proves disappointing. He stood up, wrung out his clothes, and started walking. He had no idea where he was going, but for the first time in his life, it didn't seem to matter. Jake groggily opened his eyes, his alarm blaring. He fumbled for his phone, squinting at the screen. The time read 9:47 a.m. Shit, he exclaimed, bolting upright. He was late for work. Hastily dressed, Jake burst out of his apartment and onto the bustling city street. Something felt off. People were milling about aimlessly, staring at street signs with confused expressions. At the bus stop, a crowd had gathered around the schedule, muttering in bewilderment. Jake approached a frazzled-looking woman. "Excuse me, what's going on?" She turned to him, relief flooding her face. "Oh, thank goodness. Can you tell me what this says?" She pointed at a no parking sign. Jake frowned. "It says no parking. Can't you read it?" The woman's eyes widened. "You can read? How?" As the day progressed, Jake's confusion turned to horror. News spread quickly. He was the only person left left who could read scientists were baffled, unable to even comprehend their own research notes. Governments worldwide declared states of emergency. Jake found himself thrust into the spotlight, a reluctant savior in a world suddenly illiterate. He was shuttled from one crisis to another, reading crucial documents, deciphering medical instructions, and trying to keep society from collapsing. Weeks turned into months. Jake's ability made him both revered and resented. Some hailed him as a messiah, others saw him as a threat to the New World Order. He longed for anonymity, for the simple pleasure of losing himself in a book without being pestered for translations. Weeks turned into months. Jake's ability made him both revered and resented. Some hailed him as a messiah, others saw him as a threat to the New World Order. He longed for anonymity, for the simple pleasure of losing himself in a book without being pestered for translations. One night, exhausted from another day of non-stop reading, Jake collapsed into bed. He dreamed of a library, its shelves stretching infinitely. As he reached for a book, a voice echoed, "With great power comes great responsibility." Jake awoke with a start, his alarm blaring. The time read 9:47 a.m. He grabbed his phone, heart racing, as he checked the news headlines, screamed about sports scores and celebrity gossip, all perfectly legible. Had it all been a dream? Jake laughed in relief, then paused. On his nightstand lay a book he'd never seen before, its title embossed in gold, "The Last Reader, a Cautionary Tale." With trembling hands, Jake opened the cover and began to read, wondering if perhaps his journey had only just begun.
Dr. Evelyn Sark stood before her life's work, a sleek humming machine that promised to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Years of research, countless sleepless nights, and a small fortune in grants had led to this moment. With trembling fingers, she flipped the switch. A crackle of static filled the lab, followed by a bored voice. "Thank you for contacting the Afterlife Communications Center. All our representatives are currently assisting other departed souls. Your call is important to us. Please stay on the line." Evelyn blinked in confusion. This wasn't what she'd expected. After what seemed like an eternity of hold music was that stairway to heaven, a new voice emerged. "Afterlife Communications, this is Mort speaking. How may I direct your call?" I'm trying to reach my late husband, Thomas Sark," Evelyn stammered. "One moment, please. More waiting. I'm sorry, but Mr. Sark is currently in a mandatory afterlife orientation seminar. Would you like to leave a message?" Evelyn's scientific curiosity wrestled with her mounting frustration. "Can you at least tell me if he's at peace?" A heavy sigh came through the speaker. "Ma'am, peace is a very subjective term. Mr. Sark is currently navigating our extensive afterlife bureaucracy. He's in Form 456B, karmic debt reconciliation. It may take a few centuries to process." "Centuries?" Evelyn gasped. "I'm afraid so. Now, is there anything else I can help you with? I've got a backlog of souls waiting to file their reincarnation applications." As the call ended, Evelyn slumped in her chair, her groundbreaking discovery leaving her more disheartened than enlightened. She glanced at her notes, years of theoretical work on the nature of the afterlife. With a rueful chuckle, she crumpled them up and tossed them in the trash. The next day, Evelyn began a new project, a device to streamline celestial bureaucracy. After all, she mused, if she was going to revolutionize the afterlife, she might as well make it more efficient. As she sketched out plans for automated karma calculators and express lanes for virtuous souls, Evelyn couldn't help but smile. Perhaps unraveling the mysteries of death was just the beginning. The real challenge, it seemed, was tackling the inefficiencies of eternity.
Sarah stumbled upon the antique radio at a garage sale. its Art Deco curves and tarnished dials irresistible to her collector's eye. The seller, an ancient woman with milky cataracts, cackled as she handed it over. "It's been waiting for you, dearie," she wheezed, refusing payment. Back home, Sarah placed the radio on her nightstand, admiring its vintage charm. On a whim, she plugged it in and twisted the dial. Static crackled, then cleared, revealing a crisp, professional voice. "This is emergency broadcast system. July 15th, 2025. The quarantine zone has expanded to include..." Sarah frowned. 2025. Must be some retro roleplay station. She changed the frequency. September 3rd, 2020, 2026 through Fridays. Broken out in major cities. Worldwide, the president urges conscious commerce. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Every station, every frequency, played news from the future, and none of it was good. Days passed. Sarah became obsessed, noting down every prediction, every warning, climate disasters, pandemics, economic collapse. It all pointed to a looming apocalypse. She tried warning others, but who'd believe her source was a haunted radio? Sleep deprived and paranoid, Sarah made one last attempt. She called a local news station, begging them to listen as she ranted about future disasters. The radio crackled to life behind her. October 12th, 2024, tragedy strikes as a local woman, believed to be suffering from delusions, opens fire in a TV studio before taking her own life. Authorities are investigating. Sarah froze, the phone slipping from her grasp. The radio had never mentioned a date so close before. With trembling hands, she reached for the power cord. In that moment, Sarah faced a choice. Unplug the radio, try to forget everything she heard, and live in blissful ignorance, or keep listening, shouldering the burden of foresight, and try to change a future that seemed inevitable. As her fingers brushed the cord, a new broadcast began. November 1st, 2024, celebrations worldwide as a previously unknown woman's warnings lead to the prevention of multiple global catastrophes. Sarah Mitchell hailed as a modern-day prophet. Sarah's hand halted. She sank onto her bed, heart pounding. The future, it seemed, wasn't set in stone. With a deep breath, she picked up her notebook. There was work to be done.
Danny the Dynamo Wilkins, once the darling of 90s sitcoms, now sat slumped in a dingy cubicle, his fingers dancing across a keyboard with the same enthusiasm as a slop on sedatives. The flickering fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow on his prematurely balding head, a far cry from the golden locks that once graced Keen magazines. "Wilkins, my office now." His boss's voice crackled through the intercom, shattering the monotonous hum of the office. Danny trudged to the corner office, already knowing what was coming. "You're fired, Wilkins. Your work is sloppy, you're always late, and frankly, your attitude stinks." The words hit Danny like a wet fish to the face, but he couldn't argue. He'd stopped caring long ago. Clutching a cardboard box of personal effects, Danny stumbled out onto Wilshire Boulevard. His phone buzzed, a text from his landlord. "Rent's late. Again. You've got till sundown to clear out." Danny laughed bitterly. From star of Little Rascals reboot to homeless in less than 2 decades. He wandered aimlessly, his feet carrying him towards the familiar grounds of the La Brea tar pits. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the bubbling asphalt, Danny found himself at the fence surrounding the pits. He stared into the inky blackness, memories of his glory days mixing with the acrid smell of tar. In a moment of desperation or madness, perhaps both, Danny hoisted himself over the fence. He teetered on the edge, the pit seeming to call to him. "What the hell," he muttered. "It's not like I've got anywhere else to go." With a deep breath, Danny launched himself head first into the tar. The instant his his ankle. He was yanked unceremoniously from the pit, coughing and sputtering, his entire body coated in tar. "What the hell were you thinking?" a gruff voice demanded. Danny blinked the tar from his eyes to see a night security guard standing over him, shaking his head in disbelief. As blue and red lights flashed in the distance, Danny couldn't help but laugh. Even in trying to end it all, he'd failed spectacularly. But as he sat there, covered in prehistoric goo and facing a night in jail, Danny felt something he hadn't in years. A spark of life. Maybe, just maybe, this rock bottom could be the foundation for something new. As the paramedics approached, Danny grinned through his tar mask. He had one hell of a story for his next job interview.
The fluorescent lights of the gun store flickered as Jake fumbled with the safe. His heart raced, sweat beating on his forehead, the click of a shotgun being cocked, frozen in place. Well, what do we have here? The gruff voice of the store owner made Jake's blood run cold before he could react. Something hard struck the back of his head, and darkness enveloped him. When Jake regained consciousness, he was engulfed in complete darkness. Panic set in as he realized he was in a coffin. He screamed and pounded on the lid until a strange calm washed over him. He forced himself to think rationally. With his pocket knife, Jake began slowly cutting through the wood. It took hours, but eventually he felt dirt trickling in. He dug upwards, his lungs burning for air. Just when he thought he couldn't go on, his hand broke through to the surface. Gasping, Jake pulled himself from the earth. But as he looked around, confusion replaced relief. The landscape was alien. Strange structures dotted the horizon, and unfamiliar plants surrounded him. Stumbling into what seemed to be a city, Jake was overwhelmed. Flying vehicles zoomed overhead, and people dressed in bizarre clothing stared at him as if he were a ghost. A kind-faced woman approached him. "Are you all right, sir? You look lost." Jake struggled to find words. What year is it?" "It's 2224. Are you one of those history enthusiasts?" Jake's world spun 200 years. He'd been buried for 2 centuries. Everything he knew, everyone he loved, gone. In the following days, Jake learned that much of history from his time had been lost in a series of global calamities. His knowledge of the past was both fascinating and utterly useless to this new world. The skills he'd honed as a thief were obsolete in a society where physical currency no longer existed. As he struggled to adapt, Jake found himself longing for the simplicity of his coffin. At least there he understood the rules. Now he was adrift in a sea of incomprehensible technology and social norms. But as the initial shock wore off, Jake began to see opportunity in his unique situation. In a world hungry for authentic connections to the past, perhaps his outdated knowledge could become his greatest asset. With a wry smile, he set out to carve a new place for himself in this brave new world. Armed with nothing but his wits,